Professor Zhang, is there a concern, do you think? I don't know who the concern would predominantly be with, but Donald Trump has been behaving very erratically on the global stage and been deliberately attacking a lot of his allies, from the UK to France to Spain to Germany and others, NATO. Is there a concern that starts looking like the real adult in the room and that the United States loses that role in perception globally?
The Chinese are first and foremost pragmatic, and the Chinese believe in mutual trade. And so I can see a situation in which the Europeans, the Russians, the Iranians see China as possibly a diplomatic savior in the situation. Certainly the Chinese were instrumental in organizing these weekend talks in Islamabad. So these talks were not effective and there were no results, but we can assume that these talks will become a regular thing even as this war progresses.
Gordon Chang, what do you think? I mean, you know, he's been pretty quiet, not saying too much, letting this all play out. Donald Trump's been the complete opposite, rampaging around, looking increasingly like someone who's not quite sure how to get out of this mess. But if he blames enough people, eventually somebody might accept the blame. You know, he's winning the kind of diplomatic war here, if nothing else.
I think he's certainly winning the propaganda war because he does look stable. There's no question about that. And that's backed up by all sorts of anecdotal evidence and surveys. But Piers, something had to be done about NATO. And, you know, as Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, said, Trump has been great for NATO because he's gotten countries, except for Canada, to agree to that 5% GDP spending limit. Or floor. So really, these are things that had to be done. Now, yes, you're right. Trump should not have threatened war against Denmark over Greenland, shouldn't have been making those threats against Canada, and those are not helpful. But a lot of what Trump has been saying and doing was really important because previous presidents, previous American presidents have just kicked the can down the road and let NATO erode. They let Iran develop nuclear weapons. They let this and they let that. But Trump, I think, gets credit for doing things which are politically unpopular, but I believe are necessary for the national security of the United States, but also for the safety and security of the international system as a whole. It's not just America first. This is America actually guaranteeing or creating the conditions for enduring peace in the coming decades.
I mean, that's assuming any of this works. You know, I would say the problem with that argument is I can see why this is all in Netanyahu and Israel's interests, because they just want to do as much damage in Iran as they can possibly do. And they found a president that will help them do it and smash it all up. But in terms of the American national interest here, if ultimately this gets resolved with Iran retaining its enriched uranium, with the regime still in place, albeit with different members of it at the top, with the people not rising up in the way that the Israelis had assured the Americans would happen if you decapitated the Ayatollah and the leadership. You know, if all these things, if that's how this plays out, and the Iranians have learned that they can strangle the global economy at any moment through the Strait of Hormuz if they want to, how is that not a terrible, terrible outcome for the United States?
That's a possible outcome, but it's not the only outcome. And we got to remember that the war effort is supported not only by Israel, which is a combatant, but it is also supported by Saudi Arabia and many of the Gulf Cooperation Council states. So they do not want Iran to prevail, and they've been helping the United States, and they've been backing us. So it's not just Israel. It's, I think, the region, which has come to the conclusion that Iran is a danger that can no longer be sloughed off into the future. So, yeah, you have a scenario which is perfectly possible, but there are many other ones as well, which are much brighter.
Yeah, I mean, Professor Zhang, there's no doubt that what the Iranians have done by attacking its neighbouring Gulf states has massively antagonized the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and others. They've gone after them in their most vulnerable areas, really, which are hitting the oil refineries and hitting tourist areas. There's been a 10% reduction in people defecting, not defecting, but leaving some of these Gulf states because they fear it's not safe anymore. If that was to continue that trend, or they stayed away irrevocably, you can see the whole business model of moving from reliance on oil, which is running out, to an economy through the Gulf states based on tourism, sport, entertainment, and so on. It becomes very difficult to sustain that if you don't have the people. So the stakes are pretty high here, aren't they?
It is possible that GCC does not survive this war. As you point out, the GCC is heavily dependent on expatriates, on international financing, and on global trade. And this war has shown that the GCC is really a mirage, created under the illusion that they will be protected by the American empire. In fact, we have the petrodollar system because the GCC had an agreement with America where the GCC would sell its oil in US dollars and recycle back into the US economy in exchange for American military protection. So not only did America not start this war without their consent, but when this war started, the Americans abandoned their military bases and sought shelter in hotels, and that's why they were targeted by Iranian drones. So this was a very bad deal for the GCC, and I think it's very hard for them to survive this war, and that's why I think there's so much anxiety and pressure to launch a ground invasion against Iran.
When we spoke the last time you appeared on Uncensored, you were predicting that America would have to commit ground troops. Let's take a look.
Iran is putting a lot of pressure on the GCC, and I think at the end of the day, the United States will be compelled to send ground forces. Once the United States sends in ground forces, there's no turning back. It's all in. The sunk cost fallacy kicks in. It'll be another Vietnam for the United States because Iran is a mountain fortress. And the United States right now doesn't have the manpower, the manufacturing capacity, and the political will to fight a long war of attrition on the ground in Iran.
Now, you previously predicted correctly that Trump would win the election. You predicted the war with Iran. You also said that the United States would lose that war ultimately, and that remains to be seen. But on that specific prediction about the United States eventually having to commit troops, was that predicated on having to get the enriched uranium or in trying to effect a regime change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a latter, where it is impossible to effect regime change from the air. And it's not sustainable in the long term. We're already seeing American F-15s, F-35s being downed by the Iranians because, first of all, it's hard to maintain these expensive $100 million planes in a long war. And second of all, the Iranians are developing creative air defense strategies against the Americans. So eventually, if you want to continue this war, you're going to have to send in ground troops because it's too expensive to maintain an air war.
But the cost on human life from a ground invasion could be catastrophic, not just for the people who get killed, but also for the massive political fallout that would head Donald Trump's way. And of course, he has got the backdrop of the United States midterm elections in November.
If you go with the attitude that one American soldier is worth more than $100 million F-15 or F-35, you're going to lose this war.
Right. So what should the attitude be?
Well, first of all, America should not be in this war. America should have negotiated a peace treaty with Iran. America should have lifted all trade sanctions against Iran and allowed for civilian Iranian enrichment. And this would have brought global prosperity to the world. The Iranians were perfectly happy to abide by a nuclear treaty that they signed under Obama, and that treaty was going very, very well. So first of all, this war should not have started. Now that this war has started, I think it's imperative that the Americans recognize that this war is lost, it cannot be won, and refuse to commit ground troops. Because once it commits ground troops, then this war becomes a sunk cost fallacy, mission creep. It'll be like another Vietnam. So right now, it's a turning point. I implore the Americans, do not send in ground troops. Once you send in ground troops, you're stuck there for 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's almost certainly true. I mean, Gordon Chang, you know, that paints a pretty rosy picture of the Iranian regime, you know, towing the line on the global stage. They've shown very little evidence they would do that. And in fact, of course, the whole point of the war from the Israeli point of view is that they've been the octopus providing the tentacles of terrorism to the Houthis, to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to terrorize Israel for several decades now. And that is why Israel wanted to neutralize that threat. And that is why Netanyahu worked so hard to persuade Donald Trump to bring America into it. I mean, do you think that the picture there that Professor Zhang paints of Iran being a reliable actor, perhaps if we'd done things differently, is that a likely scenario?
Yeah, I don't share it. So, for instance, with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA that President Obama negotiated, we know that the Iranians violated it. And President Trump, when he pulled out, said he couldn't certify a compliance. And we know that the Iranians were stalling and preventing inspections, which were part of that plan. And that was a direct contravention of its obligations. So, no, I don't think Iran can be trusted. I'd like to think that they could. But at least on that one, and that's the most direct precedent that we have seen that they violated it. And by the way, they have 60% enriched uranium, which they admitted to. And so that's clearly a violation as well. You just go through the list of this, Piers, and I just don't think that Iran could be trusted. It's unfortunate, but that's the nature of the regime. It wanted a nuclear weapon, absolutely determined to get it, and it would lie and cheat and steal, which it did.
What is your prediction, Gordon Chang, for how this plays out?
Well, how it plays out is determined by one individual, President Trump. And I don't know. You know, you're absolutely right when you say he's unpredictable. Now, we know what he says. I think that he is as good as his word on these issues for various reasons. He's been consistent about Iran not getting a nuclear weapon. He started this war, which he knew was going to be unpopular. So he's obviously determined to see it through. But, you know, as I said, it's up to one individual, and we're just going to have to see. As I said, I think he's going to be as good as his word.
Finally, Professor Zhang, I couldn't let you go without mentioning an encounter you had with Mehdi Hassan, who's a regular on Uncensored, in which he said you're misleading people because you're not actually a professor. And secondly, he called you China's useful idiot. Here is your chance to respond to these two charges. What would you like to say?
First of all, he's absolutely right. I am not a professor. I am not a credentialed professor. I'm a high school teacher with a pretty popular YouTube following. And it's the internet that has called me professor. In China, it's a sign of respect to call someone a professor, regardless of his credentials. So it's entirely up to you whether or not to call me a professor. And the second point, that I'm a useful idiot, look, it is entirely possible that an algorithm is popping me up because I'm saying certain things that align with the interests of certain nation states. And I don't dispute that. My rise in the internet has been meteoric. It's surprised me. But I'm committed to education. I'm committed to free debate. I'm committed to free discussion. I am perfectly happy to engage with people on both the left and the right. And I think like the path forward is open and free debate.
Yeah, I completely agree. Gordon Chang, what is your view of Professor Zhang? Are you happy to call him a professor? And do you think he's China's useful idiot?
You know, everything that Professor Zhang just said, I can certainly agree with him. I understand that title is something that people have given him, and that's fine with me. You know, he has views. Some of them align with what the Communist Party of China believes. Some of them do not, as we just heard. He has his views, and I wouldn't characterize him with that useless idiot term. I think he just has views that both do align and don't align with in China.
Yeah, which from where I sit is actually a pretty good place to be. I have the same about my own country and my own government. I agree with them about some things. I disagree with them about others. Last time I checked is actually a pretty good place for most people to find themselves. But anyway, I'm quite happy to call you Professor Zhang. I think you are an internet sensation. It's great having you on Uncensored regularly now, and please come back soon. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.